Hi there, it's me, Brett Fish, and welcome to another episode of Race with Me. And in today's episode, we are going to look at something that is potentially mind blowing as we explore the idea that sometimes everybody being treated the same is not justice. So, wait, I'm saying that sometimes people being treated the same is not justice. That really doesn't seem to make sense. Perhaps I can explain a little better using one of the analogies that I've heard that helps explain white privilege. And we've already spoken about this, the idea that white people receive certain benefits purely based on the color of our skin, so through no effort or energy or work of our own. And one of the pictures that describes this is kind of picturing a 400-meter race, running race. And imagine that the white person, their starting block is 200 meters into the race. The black person, they are starting at the 400-meter mark. And in front of the black person, there is a lot of barbed wire, there are hurdles, there are wild dogs. There are just a number of different obstacles and things put in the place or put in the way that are going to slow the black person down. Plus, they're starting so far behind the white person. Now, if we say they treated the same, when the gun goes off, they start running, then obviously if we look at the scenario, we can see that it isn't fair, that the black person is being disadvantaged. And so that starts to help us see why in that scenario certain things would need to be given to the black person that weren't given to the white person to help them have any chance in the race. So the black person would need to be given an extra minute or something like that so that they can catch up to the distance ahead and overcome some of the obstacles that are in the way. Now, there's a beautiful cartoon that helps explain this, and I've seen this in many ways, and it kind of grows and develops as it goes, because a lot of the time we think that equality is the thing we're aiming at. And maybe before I get there, I'm not sure if I've covered this before, but I know for me, when I started getting involved in these conversations, for many years, I started speaking about diversity as the end goal. We need to get diversity. We need to have a greater measure of diversity. And what I discovered later is that diversity is just having people in the room. So where before you had a room full of white people, now you've got a room full of white, colored, black, and Indian people. And so as an end goal, you might think, cool, now we've achieved diversity. Now we've arrived. But if you don't have integration and belonging, then all diversity means is that you've added people into the room. And so if white people are still in all positions of leadership, if white people are still getting all the money, if white people are still having all the voice in that room, then diversity means nothing. So diversity is a good start, but it's not an end goal. We are working towards a sense of integration where everyone's voice is equal, where the money is being shared by everyone, where everybody gets to play, basically. And so that's integration, it's belonging, it's where black people in the room feel like they belong as much as white people in the room. They don't feel like they're coming to a white person's party, but it feels like that room belongs to everyone and everyone takes part in it. So the connection between diversity and integration, belonging is similar to what we're going to be looking at now, and I think it's helpful. And so in the first cartoon, you can see people are trying to watch this game and they're behind a fence. In the first picture, there is equality. Everybody's been given a box. And so we think equality is the answer. But because you've got a taller person and because you've got a really short person, having one box each, it is equality, but it doesn't help. It's not justice, because one person's still really struggling to see the game and one person is so far away from seeing the game. And so you need something else. And before we look at what we need, I think it's helpful to look at the second picture, which is equality and equity. Equity is when you give them the amount of boxes that they need so that they can all see. But then you add in this idea of reality, and reality is so far removed from even equality, but especially removed from equity. And that is honestly the situation in South Africa. If you look at where the wealth is sitting, if you look at where the land is sitting, it is still predominantly in the hands of white people. You can do the research, you can check out the statistics, and even though it is starting to be a bit more aligned, we're starting to have a black middle class, we're starting to have black wealth, it still largely looks white. But it is moving to a time where it will still be heavily divided, but just on class and not as much on race as it has been in the past. But this is still something we need to look at when we're talking about justice. And then the last one, I found an even better picture of this, which talks about liberation, or maybe the picture that we are speaking about when we talk about justice. And that's when the fence is completely removed and there are not certain people inside enjoying the game and those outside having to watch it from afar. And so liberation, freedom, justice is when the game or life is shared equally, or a lot more equally, amongst all the people. And you probably heard the saying, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for the rest of his life. Now, a friend of mine, Shane, taught me that analogy can be extended. And he basically taught me this idea of asking better questions. And as white people, if we're asking, what can I do? One of the ways we can move forwards in this is to ask better questions. So if you think about that phrase, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his life. There are some more questions that need to be asked. We need to ask who put up a fence around the pond. We need to ask who's been polluting the pond water. We need to ask, why are fishing licenses so expensive? We need to ask who has access. And so suddenly when we start asking more questions, we will start to be coming up with ideas that will lead us towards justice. When we're asking one or two questions, we might head towards equality, we might head towards equity. But when we really want to seek justice, we really need to ask about the things behind the things. And in the last couple of years, I've learned that, and it's called critical questioning. And it's not about being critical in terms of criticism, but it's about asking the questions that need to be asked to really uncover the truth. Too often we deal with symptoms, and we've started speaking about it already. We need to deal with systems, we deal with structures, we deal with things that are put in place that even if we sort out the symptoms now, it's going to affect the next person, it's going to affect our children and their children. How do we start affecting systems and structures and taking them down so that future generations can have liberation, can have freedom, can live in justice? And there's a saying that says, when privilege is all you've known, equality can feel like oppression. And I think for a lot of us white people, when things like BEE were introduced, when things like sports quotas on sports teams, the rugby team, the cricket team, all that kind of thing, when those were introduced, a lot of people would come up with statements like, oh, reverse racism, you're keeping spaces for black people. Isn't that just another form of racism? And it's that whole thing, as because we always occupied all the places in the team, because we occupied all the places in the jobs, it feels like oppression now that space is being made for other people. And so we need to hold that saying, when privilege is all you've known, equality or justice can feel like oppression, and start to realize what needs to be done to make the playing field more even, what needs to be done so that everybody can have access to all of the things. And so what I want to leave you with today is this idea of asking better questions. How do we really interrogate what's going on in South Africa? And maybe one last example in terms of equality not being the answer. If you think of somebody in the southern suburbs in Cape Town with a job interview in Cape Town, and you think of somebody in Khayelitsha in a township having a job interview in Cape Town, and you go, well, they've both got a job interview, it's the same. Yet the person in the township, it's a greater distance they have to travel, and so there's a greater cost that is involved, and there's a greater time, and there's maybe the insecurity of, is public transport going to get them there? And so something that seems equal at face value, when you look a little bit deeper, when you understand the story, when you understand the context and the history, we start seeing what kind of questions need to be given. And so the person that's living in the township needs to be given more money and more time and more opportunity for them to have equal access to that job opportunity. So let's ask better questions. Let's think about this stuff. Let's stop chasing after equality. Let's look for equity, and let's especially look for liberation and justice for all.